everyone. Welcome to the show, The Court of Public Opinion. Almost Easter. Almost Easter. We're going to take a break and we'll be doing the show next on Tuesday after Easter. But you have a happy and holy and safe Easter. Be careful on the roads particularly. Happy birthday. Happy wedding anniversary. It is, let me tell you, April the 6th. The Post-it note was introduced. When do you think the Post-it note, Pete? When do you think that was introduced?
Those little yellow things?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think they've been there forever. But no, apparently 1980.
Okay.
Simple idea.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, very simple idea. But it works. The first film shown on an aeroplane. What a novel idea. You know, the idea of aeroplane travel. I was reading something the other day about the old Rose Bay. It was more like a seaport than an airport, but that's where they landed all these big Sunderland and Catalina planes, ex-surplus World War II. And back in the day when they called Qantas Empire Airlines. And there was Teal, which was the old Air New Zealand. They flew these magnificent seaplanes into Rose Bay in Sydney, which was probably the first really international airport in the country. And they could take you anywhere in the world. Took a while because you had to stop here and stop there and stop the other place, and very expensive. But you know, it was like travelling in a first-class hotel room. Amazing. And they served you food and all kinds of things, and maybe they even showed you a movie. I don't know. But the first movie here, it says 1925 on a British Airways plane. 1772, Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia, ends the tax on men with beards. Pete? You've just got tax relief. Ah, dear. It was enacted by Tsar Peter the Great in 1898, and Catherine the Great ends it. You know, what's the old saying about if you want less of it, you tax it. If you want more of it, you subsidise it. Dear oh dear. Teflon was invented by Roy J. Plunkett. Never heard of him. 1938. Teflon. Teflon. Hudson Fysh, speaking of Qantas Empire Airways, great Australian aviator, businessman, co-founder of Qantas, dies at 79. The year was 1974. George Eastman begins selling his Kodak flexible rolled film for the first time in 1889, believe it or not. 1889. Richard the Lionheart, King of England, dies of his wounds. He was only 41. Richard the Lionheart, 1199. Greer Garson, British actress, Goodbye Mr. Chips, Mrs. Miniver, dies at the age of 92. I was trying to think of the name of the actor that she loved. They worked together so beautifully. It's hard to imagine they weren't lovers in real life. Who was that? Were so many leading men, as they called them in those days. I think it was Walter Pidgeon. I think I'm right. Walter Pidgeon and Greer Garson. 1996 she died. World's first animated cartoon is released. In 1906, it was called Humorous Phases of Funny Faces by Stuart Blackton. I wonder if that's still around anywhere. I wonder what that would be worth. Certainly worth looking at. And Anthony Fokker, the Dutch aviation pioneer, aircraft manufacturer. He was born in East Java, the Dutch East Indies. He died in 1939. And they made those funny movies about Meet the Fockers. And it's a perfectly reasonable name. I think probably Meet the Fockers. It was one of the funniest movies. And they did it all straight-faced. Got great respect for people who can do that. Clearly I can't. No. Oh, I did, just before I do anything else, I wanted to congratulate Taylor's Wines, because the other day I did mention, I think it was February, March anyway, Taylor's Wines, their $26 bottle of Chardonnay, Jaraman. I don't drink Chardonnay, I don't know anything about it. A 2022 bottle of wine, $26 bottle of wine, voted the best wine in the world. Golly. And I'm happy to tell you, and congratulations to Michael Taylor and all of those people at that fine South Australian company, because Taylor's Wines have been named the Winery of the Year. A winery in Australia has beaten some of the most well-known wine regions in the world, claiming the title of Winery of the Year in a prestigious competition. Taylor's Wines in Clare Valley, South Australia, presented with the prestigious title of this year's Monterey International Wine Competition as the best winery in the world. Now that's amazing. I haven't seen that in the popular press here. I don't know that we sort of blow our own bugle as much as we should. Interest rates on hold, not unexpected. They're still ridiculously low by historical standards, 3.6%. Under Labor, in my experience, limited experience, it's usually about 17%, and sometimes it gets to 22%. I've lived through that, as a lot of people did. So 3.6 is a fairly manageable sum. All right, not as good as a tenth of 1%, which is what it was when we were trying to get the economy off its knees. But who would have thought, realistically, it was going to stay there for long? Anyway, be that as it may. Donald Trump is being Donald Trump. Yesterday, you would have seen all of the stuff, and I guess we're going to see more of it all the way through to December when he goes back to court. What was it, 32 indictments, not guilty pleas and all the rest of it, and it's all a conspiracy. And look, he could be right, but politics is a dirty business. And you don't want to give people who wish you harm the ammunition to do you harm. America is fascinating, you know, because once something is before the court, it's sub judice in this country. But in America, everybody's going to be talking about this for the next 6, 7, 8, 9 months. Amazing. TikTok is goodbye for federal and state governments, the iPhone and the iPads, etc. Now this is interesting. I don't know what Marty Cooper, and the name probably means nothing to you, but I don't know what Marty Cooper would make of TikTok. He's well over 90. He invented the mobile phone. 1973 it was, and he made the first phone call on the 3rd of April, 1973. That's 50 years ago. And he talks about this thing. It was about 1.5 kilos in weight, about the size of a house brick, a bit bigger. A Motorola it was. Made the first phone call from New York on the 3rd of April 73, and he doesn't like the modern telephones. He doesn't like the modern mobile phones one bit. Like I say, what would he make of TikTok and all the rest of these things? Tuesday afternoon, Brussels, NATO headquarters. Finland's national flag raised to become the 31st nation to join the alliance. The border between Finland and Russia is about 1,000 kilometres long. In fact, I think it's probably the longest or the most exposed border to Russia in Europe. Norway has some exposure, Sweden certainly. But There's that border, 1,000 kilometres long. Russia is now sending troops to strengthen the border. Sweden, anyway, will join NATO, and Norway is already in NATO. So all of the things that Putin said he was worried about, he has accelerated because of his invasion of Ukraine. Go figure. And if you want evidence of just how useless the UN is, really, Russia has taken charge of the United Nations Security Council. Now, Russia and China already have veto. Now, they're not the only countries to have veto, but they're the ones that should be, when you think of past behaviour, most likely to be criticised. Criticism means nothing because they have the right of veto. This makes a joke of the whole thing. But Russia in charge of the United Nations Security Council? Fox, henhouse comes to mind. Here's a fun fact. Only 8% of the working population of Australia want to go back to the office. 8%. It's an awful lot of empty office space on that basis. I always thought that it wasn't a question of choice. One did what the boss wanted you to do, or told you to do. The other thing we've got to consider is that most of these huge office buildings are owned by superannuation funds. Many of them, industry funds, union-controlled industry funds, who depend on the rents paid in those office buildings to provide the return to their members. Now, I know that in New York they're turning a lot of office space into apartments, but gee, that's very expensive. And I mean, if you look around Melbourne and Sydney particularly, probably to a degree Adelaide and Perth, but not so much. But you could be looking at a real estate catastrophe, a real real estate catastrophe. If we find ourselves with our major cities filled with unoccupied office towers, a collapse in the value of CBD real estate could trigger all kinds of things. Not good. And with builders going broke all over the place, which does happen from time to time, it's almost a cycle, isn't it? I mean, you don't want half-finished extensions and renovations, or worse still, whole houses, or what should be finished whole houses, unfinished. I've heard various stories, many stories. Many of these companies, some of them really big ones, are kind of on the brink. Now, whether it's a domino thing, or it's brought about by the interest rates, or shortages, escalating costs, it's something to watch very closely. So if you are having work done with a builder, be careful. Check it out as best you can. Medicare is hemorrhaging $3 billion a year. Probably as much as $8 billion. I've seen two reports. $8 billion being the worst analysis. Non-compliance, fraud, no accountability, you name it. In any 1 week there are millions and millions of Medicare transactions or claims, and there's no overview. And if anyone thinks without overview you don't have fraud, he is nuts. It's just like the NDIS, as I've always said, and it comes back to socialised medicine. It just doesn't work. Medibank in the beginning was Gough Whitlam's great dream. It didn't work. It was a failure. Reconstituted by Bob Hawke as Medicare. And now they're telling us from on high, it is not fit for purpose. Well, we're wasting an awful lot of money and apparently not pleasing anybody. The National Housing and Finance Corporation of Australia report on housing, they call it the State of the Nation Housing Report. It says we face a shortfall of 100,000 homes within 5 years. Now, you'd be pretty perked up if you were a builder, wouldn't you? That's an awful lot of building. People are obviously worried that the government is going to maybe revise negative gearing, and by revise, that's code for scrap. Now, negative gearing drives a lot of the investment, and it could be for owner-occupier or it could be for rental. But it is one of the drivers of that kind of investment. And with building companies dropping off the perch, the building industry, for as long as I can remember, has been about boom and bust. They've just got to get the settings right. I think supply and demand, there are too many variables probably. Just too many things to actually keep under control if you happen to be a building company. And it would be even worse if you were a big building company. But without negative gearing, and I must put my cards on the table and tell you I have nothing negatively geared, so I have no axe to grind. But I understand that that is the engine room of a lot of the investment that builds the rental accommodation that we so desperately need. There are things you can control and there are things you can't control. There's a big kerfuffle coming up in South Australia about the people who run our public transport. It was promised that the privatisation deal would save a huge amount of money. Now, the state would pay to have a private operator run the buses and the trains. It was a contract worth many, many millions of dollars. Well, now the new Labor government says that they don't want that. They want to take control back, take it all back. The opposition says it's going to cost too much money to walk out on these contracts. Well, there would have to be cancellation fees, wouldn't there? Think French submarines, for example. Cancellation of that contract would be complicated, and it would, in my mind anyway, end up costing the taxpayer too much. Pretty simple. But here's something that's even simpler. If the government says it's a better deal to bring back the buses and the trains into public ownership and operation, let them prove it. If the opposition says that it's more efficient to let these private operators do the job, let them prove it. Stop the bickering. You both can't be right. It's got to be pretty simple to prove one way or the other. Just demonstrate the cost benefit to us, we the people, the taxpayer. And just on transport quickly before I say goodbye and happy Easter, I don't know what you think of those scooters. They're all over the place. I think they're very messy. A vexed question in Melbourne, as they are I think in pretty much most cities. They've kicked the can down the road in Melbourne and they've said, oh, we'll have another trial. We'll extend the trial, ladies and gentlemen. Well, while they're extending the trial in Europe, it's an interesting thing to look at. 90% of the people in Paris, for example, 90%, they say, get rid of them. And you can bet every other city in Europe would probably be saying the same sort of thing. 90% of the people want them banned off the pavement and off the road. And here in Adelaide, of course, we are dithering. Have a safe and wonderful Easter, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for being with us in the Court of Public Opinion. I'm Jeremy Cordeux, and Peter Clayton and I will be back Tuesday. Bye for now. Believe in yourself.